All right. So excited to have one of our team members on the call today. Selima, so nice to have you. How are you today?
I am doing great. Just trying to stay warm here in my area, but other than that, doing great. How are you doing,
Yeah,
Megan?
about the same. So I'm in Michigan. I know you're in the Chicagoland area, but the snow is deep and thick, and my little dog is not liking it at all.
Yeah, it's not too. It hasn't snowed a lot, but we're expecting a lot of really cold weather tonight. So
Okay.
um, it's kind of trying to stay warm.
Absolutely. So I want to just kick it off with kind of getting to know you a little bit better. So, as we've kind of shared, we're doing some meet the team sessions and just a quick overview of who we have on the team, what kind of drives them, what their passion is. So, I'd love to just start it off by throwing it to you of kind of who are you and not just your title, but who makes you you? What is it about you, Selima, that you think is pretty awesome and exciting to share with the world?
Well, I don't know about awesome and exciting, but I am starting to look at it more through that lens as I'm getting older. So I am without getting into kind of what I do for a living, but what I do for a living is driven by who I am. I think it's all one and the same. So what makes me me is my desire to unite people. I always have felt that being raised biculturally, being the daughter of immigrants, the firstborn in the United States in out of my siblings and my family, I have always felt that each individual community that I have been a part of, I have felt that I belonged in that particular community because I've had to adjust. So in those experiences, although they were challenging when I was younger, I have felt that they've really served as gifts for me, which is why I decided to pursue the field of education later on. So, as I said, I'm the child of immigrants, but I have spent an extensive amount of time also experiencing life from the remote small villages in the Eastern Europe where my parents were raised. So when I would go there, I would get a completely different perspective on what mattered. And then I would come to the United States. This kind of was my entire childhood. I would come back to the United States and different things mattered. So each group felt passionate about their own values and what they felt mattered. And I was kind of stuck in the middle. I would feel very connected to the purpose driven life of the American culture. And a lot of most of the time that I spent in the United States as a child was in a small town. So then you had that additional culture of a small town, not very culturally diverse, and wanting to belong there. So you go from small Midwest town in the United States to small remote village in Eastern Europe, and you're just kind of somewhere in the middle. So that pretty much is my childhood in a nutshell. Um, I don't remember life being monolingual. I've been bilingual since I can remember. So the linguistic aspect of my upbringing was very challenging growing up. I always scored really low on reading comprehension types of activities growing up in school. And I always felt that I did have a lack of vocabulary that a lot of my peers didn't seem to have. So you you kind of start to feel well I started to feel that I wasn't maybe as intelligent as some of my classmates when I was younger in elementary school. And then you know I couldn't get help at home from my parents because their education capped at fourth grade, not even in the United States. And so growing up with parents who I could tell felt that they had kind of an inferiority complex in the United
Right.
States. Um, so you grow up feeling sorry for your parents because you know that they're just trying to figure out how to navigate life. And being 100% Albanian also brought challenges to life in the United States because growing up in the 80s and 90s, there first of all there wasn't translation devices as there are now, but the the main languages that there that services were available for were, sorry, I think we cut off, were Spanish mostly, and later on it would be Polish, maybe Arabic, depending on where the high concentrated populations of those immigrants were. So we did connect with other immigrant families. We sort of related to them, but we still couldn't fully connect because there was still that language barrier. So that feeling of isolation, seeing my parents not be able to use all the skills that they had because they were in a foreign land. It, I just, I mean, and I think by nature, I'm just a very empathetic person, but I think how I was raised brought on even more empathy. So I then started studying French as in high school. Well, I started studying French actually when I was going to school in the villages in what used to be Yugoslavia, and I didn't really like it because I my teacher only spoke Macedonian and French, and I only spoke English and Albanian. So I really hated the class because there were no common languages. So when I came back to the United States for high school, I French just quickly became one of my favorite subjects, and then I was finally able to see how language functions from an academic perspective. And then I started to make those connections. Oh, French is like Albanian over here, and then oh, they do that too. And then that really started to like expand my global view because it seems like I did have an expansive global view, but it was really mostly Midwest United States. Well, I was born in New York, but we moved to the Midwest when I was young. So it was like Midwest United States and then Yugoslavia. Those were like the worlds. But then when I brought in France, and then I brought in all of the diverse countries that speak French, and then those had similarities to my culture, and then it was like I was in complete bliss in my French class, and that's why I'm a French teacher now. And then
Right.
later on I picked up Spanish, and then the connections between Spanish and Albanian were close, and yeah, it's just been. I'm very very lucky that that spark I felt as a young teenager is still with me now, all these years later. So that's kind of where I am, who I am, what I do in a nutshell.
I love that. And I know when we do these meet the teams, I always like to share what I see as their superpower as well. And the one piece I appreciate about you so much on our team is that truly that lens of cultural understanding. And I think it comes from a lot of what you just shared with your background, but also just who you are as a person. You have a really strong understanding of different cultural backgrounds and seeing the similarities like you talked about and also seeing some of those differences, and just your lived experiences are so expansive beyond someone who has only lived in one country. You know, in the United States, we have a lot of different areas. You talked about the Midwest, you talk about New York, you've got the Pacific, you've got the Pacific Northwest, you have the Southwest. You have different areas that definitely shape your worldview within the US. But people
Absolutely.
who have spent a considerable amount of time outside the US really tend to understand cultural differences and significances on a totally different level. So I just want to share that with you that appreciation is something that definitely supports our team. I'm curious how you got into, or if you could share the story of how you got connected to Us Squared.
So I have been wanting, so as much as I love languages and even linguistics, and I mean I'm totally a language nerd, I just felt that I wanted to, I couldn't share all of these other pieces fully in the classroom just through my job. I try to really incorporate as much as I can in culture. Language and culture are one and the same, but I wanted a little bit more. I wanted to work with other professional organizations, and I wanted to also share not only what I've learned through life, but also what I've learned through teaching. Because what I've learned through teaching, and I'm lucky enough to teach in a very diverse school, And I've learned so much from my students and how my approach works or maybe doesn't work, or in what ways I've shifted as a person just by making these authentic connections with my students. So you and I sort of connected on LinkedIn, and I remember you posted something about who is the way that you worded it was like, who's ready to connect. I can't remember. I don't want to like misquote you, but I was like, wow, this is exactly what I'm looking for. So I like immediately reached out to you, and yeah, and then we had our conversation, and I was just like, this is exactly what I'm looking for. Just ways to connect, whether it's other staff in a school building, school districts, and other companies and organizations that we've worked for and with.
Yeah.
I have also tried to establish that close connection with my colleagues as much as I can, and the education world is not simple. It's not simple and it's not easy. But I felt that some of the hurdles that some of my colleagues have is because they do lack, to no fault of their own sometimes, that understanding and that connection with the students because they can't relate to them as much.
Mhm.
So I'm just so fortunate that I can relate to the person that's been kind of in a small town because I grew up in a small town. I can relate to the child with immigrant parents because that was me too. I can relate to a girl who is trying to be recognized for her accomplishments as much as her male counterparts because that was also me. So as I said earlier, all these things that were really, I felt, burdens and deficits in some ways growing up, they're just now strengths. So I was really happy to train with us squared and become part of the team because I've learned so much even from working with the team as a team member on us squared. So it's like these paths have been paved for me, and I couldn't be more grateful.
Yeah, it's been great working alongside you, and I hope to do so for many, many or more years. I know
Same.
in your work with us, we've worked with education. We've also worked with some of our corporate clients together, and your approach is definitely one that I think everyone can learn a little from. So I appreciate you tremendously. Thank you so much for being part of the team. And speaking of that, if you're interested in learning a little bit more about Salima's story, Selima is actually going to be featured in our next podcast episode. So, in March, we're going to be talking about women and the impacts of sexism in the workplace and also in our personal lives. So, if you're interested in hearing a little bit more from Selima, check out that podcast episode.